Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute of History, JohnJDwyer.com, me, Gwen Falconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwood's Stores, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with our Will Rogers Medallion-winning author-historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. It's Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history with the stories we remember. John J. Dwyer, this is about the greatest generation?
It was the universal event of the nation in the century. It was the watershed of millions of destinies. It was the source of emotion and the crucible of character. It made histories and personal unions and generations. And after its time, it yielded the nostalgia into which children were born, and it gave to the future a fabric of common experience which made our national condition. Well, novelist Paul Horgan wrote the preceding words about the war between the states in his epic novel, A Distant Trumpet, but they well apply to the central event of America's next century as well, World War II. The greatest cataclysm in history, it reached across the world on land, at sea, and through the air. It destroyed some of the most powerful empires in history and raised up more powerful ones yet. Birthed in the pursuit of conquest and resolution of grievances, it freed entire populations, enslaved others, and left still others enslaved, though by different oppressors. It shaped a global geopolitical framework that endures to a large extent more than 3/4 of a century later. It wiped out between 60 and 80 million people, far more than any other disaster, and approximately 3% of the Earth's population. It produced the first man-made weapons capable of destroying life on Earth and their first two uses. And in Oklahoma, it cut down thousands of the state's most promising young and not so young men, and wounded or damaged or shortened the lives of many thousands more of them. Parents buried their sons, wives lost their husbands, and children grew up without their fathers, or with or without fathers who survived the war but not intact, whether physically, psychologically, or both. And it bequeathed a legacy of bitterness and hatred in the state's World War II generation for the Germans and especially the Japanese, at whose hands so many of their friends and loved ones fell. Whether taking the form of racial prejudice, refusal to do business with companies based in the former Axis countries, or difficulty in forgiving the people of those countries, this phenomenon endured into the 21st century. Thrilling scenes also animated the era, though. Feats consecrated in the American memory, then and even now. The big band and swing music of Glenn Miller, the Dorseys, Benny Goodman, former Oklahoma City resident Count Basie, OKC native Charlie Christian, and others. The unparalleled sacrifice and total effort of nearly the entire population to turn the tide of a vast worldwide conflict in which America's opponents were triumphant over all comers prior to his entrance and even for a long while after it. The legendary battles and deeds at locations now hallowed in the state and national soul. The crushing of the fearsome, mass-murdering Nazi German and Imperial Japanese regimes. The unforgettable V-Days when first Germany and then Japan surrendered. The unmatched post-war commercial innovation and economic boom that propelled the USA into the greatest financial and political power in history. The profound events of the 1930s led in many ways to those of the 1940s. These consecutive decades of tumult presented enormous obstacles for the so-called greatest generation to overcome. They bound them together in a lasting concord of experience, and they set the stage for momentous later events and consequences whose connection to the earlier ones often grew apparent only with the passage of much time. So like I said, World War II, even through the perspective of one state, is way too big an epic to even scratch the surface of in just one Oklahoma Gold. So we'll take the next 3 episodes to explore it. This time, in Part 1, we'll explore the big picture of the war and Oklahoma's unique role in it. Next time, in Part 2, as America's unsurpassed industrial might and engines of war fire into play on a level never before seen in the history of the world, we'll take you back like you're there yourself, in the living rooms, the businesses, the communities of Oklahoma, as the whole people of the Center State rise up to support the gigantic crusade for freedom in every way they can. Then, in our concluding Part 3, we'll rehearse an awe-inspiring gallery of World War II Oklahoma heroes. You will be stunned at how huge a role they played in saving the world from the tyrannical forces terrorizing it during those years. And yes, somehow the New York publishing houses and Hollywood Dream Factory just missed again on these. But here on Part 1, we're going back to a different time, a different world. For all the trouble we have in our own, December 7, 1941 was a day hopefully none of us will ever experience. For that was the historic day of infamy, as wartime President Franklin Delano Roosevelt called it. It was the day that the stunning, arch-evil Japanese attack on American Army, Army Air Corps, and naval installations at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, wiped out most of the fighting ships of America's Pacific Fleet. It was the day that without warning they killed more than 3,000 Americans, many, if not most of them, civilian non-combatants. It was the day that the Titanic battleship USS Oklahoma, naval pride of the state, which boasted a crew of over 2,000 sailors, weighed 22 million tons, fired 1,400-pound shells, and was the biggest ship in the U.S. Navy when built during World War I, during which it saw duty. It was the day the USS Oklahoma was destroyed by 9 Japanese torpedoes and over 400 of its crew killed and many hundreds more seriously wounded. 2 Oklahoma crewmen who died won Medals of Honor for helping shipmates escape. The Oklahoma History Center displays the tattered American flag that flew on the Oklahoma and the rudder that steered the ship. And Gwen, few of us realize that Oklahoma City resident and son-in-law of former OKC Mayor Walter Dean, Lieutenant General Walter C. Short, commanded U.S. Army forces at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese delivered their devastating attack that brought America into World War II. The government's cashiering of him in disgrace was later excoriated by many critics, including the United States Senate, which exonerated him of blame. Senators declared that Short and Naval Commander Husband Kimmel were the 2 final victims of Pearl Harbor, and in addition to very possibly being unjustly scapegoated with the blame of this breathtaking American military defeat, they were denied vital intelligence that was available in Washington, possibly because the government desired some sort of attack that would incite the American people to war. Now that is an incendiary accusation, but one that has gathered an ever-increasing amount of evidence in recent decades.
I wonder what the golden nugget will be. Now that's Oklahoma gold. Dignifying our history through the stories we treasure. John J. Dwyer, Oklahoma and World War II?
That's right, Gwen. When the U.S. entered the war, Germany and Japan stood at the zenith of their power and expanse. For a half year afterwards, the Axis powers continued to pound the Allies, which included democracies like America, Britain, France, Canada, and many others, as well as the brutal Soviet Union Communist Empire headed by Russia and the Civil War-ravaged Chinese. Then in June 1942, American ingenuity and courage delivered a stunning and devastating victory against the previously undaunted Japanese. It took place at the Naval Battle of Midway in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This began a long, gradual, gruesome turning of the tide in the Allies, particularly the USA's, favor in the Pacific. But always it came at so high a cost. In June 1942, personally commanding a bomber attack against the Japanese during that pivotal American victory at Midway was General Clarence Tinker, Oklahoman, 1/8 Osage, and the first U.S. Major or Lieutenant General with indigenous ancestry. His B-24 Liberator went down on the mission, and he became the first U.S. general to die in the war. A few months later, the Army Air Corps changed the name of the Oklahoma City Air Depot to a name familiar now to us all, Tinker Army Airfield, in his honor. It became the world's largest air base. Simultaneous to the Battle of Midway, across the world in Oklahoma City, the first African American in U.S. Marine history, Langston University student Alfred Masters, was sworn in. He shipped out to Montford Point Camp in North Carolina, a new post established to train black Marine recruits. Another African American trailblazer, Jimmy Stewart of OKC, championed Masters' historic effort and soon joined him, along with 900 other black men, as Montford Point Marines. They constituted the core of the first ever African American Marine Battalion. In Europe, meanwhile, America's entry provided an incalculable morale boost to the beleaguered British in the West and Russians in the East. U.S. Lend-Lease provisioning to those nations of everything from clothing to battleships had helped prevent both from already perishing to the mighty Germans. It continued apace. The U.S. also put boots and big guns on the ground in North Africa, where the Germans and Italians surrendered at the end of 1942. But despite the hopeful signs emanating from the bloody early American campaigns of late 1942, victory was so very far away. Millions of American young people and not so young people were on the other side of the world from their homes in perilous straits or headed there. How many Oklahomans suspected it would be years before most of them came home, or that more than 6,000 of them never would, and that double that number would, but with significant physical or psychological scars or both? In our book, Oklahomans 2, which chronicles the modern post-statehood history of the Sooner State, the entire chapter we devote to World War II features a memorable full-page ad placed in the Daily Oklahoman newspaper by the legendary John A. Brown Department Store Company. The ad combined the imagery of that first Christmas, of Christ's birth, and the star that was so prominent that night, with the star hanging in the windows of homes all over Oklahoma during that bitter Christmas of 1942, each star indicating that one patriot from that family was serving his or her country across the seas. These poignant words from that ad, Gwen, share the hearts of those long ago Oklahomans, our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and now even great-great-grandparents, and what they were facing as America yet again stood between evil on an unimaginable scale and the rest of the cowering world. And I quote now from that John A. Brown ad, "Not a star plucked from the sky millions of light years away, thousands of centuries old. This is a star of now, of today, of this Christmas." We asked the woman in whose house it hung to tell us what Christmas 1942 would mean to her. "Christmas 1942, she said, with a glance past the wreath and the service flag and out into the star-studded night. Then suddenly her eyes took on a distant look, for she was remembering. She was remembering last Christmas, Christmas 1941, and the tall, eager lad who had sat in this room speaking so passionately about enlisting. "Sure, Mom," he had said, "I know it means giving up a couple of years, maybe even my life, but nothing's too much to give for something you really believe in." Her eyes grew clear again as she came back to the present. "Christmas 1942, she said, "I'll tell you what it means to me." And it was just a simple answer that she gave, this American mother with a son fighting for his country in a distant land. But it was an answer that shone as clear as the star on that service flag, as true as the first Christmas star. It was an answer that might have come out of the heart of wartime America. "Christmas 1942, she said gently, means what Christmas has always meant. It means giving all you can for something you really believe in."
Now that's Oklahoma Gold. Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute of History, JohnJDwyer.com, me, Gwen Falconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwood's Stores, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with our Will Rogers Medallion-winning author-historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. It's Oklahoma Gold. Magnifying our history through the stories we continue. John J. Dwyer, Oklahoma and World War II. What's in part 2?
Well, Gwen, you'll remember last time in part 1 of our 3-part Oklahoma Gold series, Oklahoma and World War II, we set the stage for the Sooner State's historic role in the greatest and most terrible contest of arms in world history. We recalled how a partnership of brutal and racist dictatorships led by Hitler's Nazi Germany in Europe, North Africa, and the Atlantic, and Tojo's Imperial Japan in the Far East and Pacific had set about vast campaigns of conquest. This time, in part 2, as America's unsurpassed industrial might and engines of war fire into play on a level never before seen in the history of the world, we're taking you back like you're there yourself, in the living rooms, the businesses, the communities of Oklahoma, as the whole people of the Sooner State rise up to support the gigantic crusade for freedom in every way they can. America was dragged into the war on December 7, 1941, when the majority of our powerful Pacific Fleet was destroyed in a stunning sneak attack by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, including the legendary USS Oklahoma battleship. An Oklahoman, meanwhile, commanded the U.S. Army forces at Pearl. Another soon became the first black United States Marine, and yet another was the first major general with native blood, as well as the first American general to die in the war, as he led a heroic bombing mission at the Battle of Midway. But Midway, as well as Russian-led Soviet Union victories over the Germans in Europe, turned the tide of victory in the war, and the pendulum of battle gradually swung in favor of the Allies through 1943. But Gwen, we promised a front row view of early 1940s life in this program among the young, the elderly, the wives and the widows, and those males classified as unfit to serve in war, in the towns, the cities, and the countryside of wartime Oklahoma. These folks had lived through not only the Great Depression, which the rest of America and most of the world did in the 1930s, but the terrifying Dust Bowl of the 1930s, which others did not. The vast armies needed for global war did necessitate the production of goods such as foodstuffs and petroleum that aided Oklahoma's major employment and revenue sectors. The state also became a hub of military, particularly aeronautical training. The government constructed many bases in the state, foremost among them Tinker Air Base, which we discussed in part 1, in the newly incorporated town of Midwest City, a community that was the brainchild of master OKC real estate developer W.P. Bill Atkinson of Oklahoma City. Named in honor of fallen Oklahoma war hero and General Clarence Tinker, Tinker became the largest air depot on Earth. Contrary to prevailing mythologies, however, World War II no more ended the Great Depression for Oklahomans on the home front than did Roosevelt's New Deal. Wartime Sooner civilians were allowed only scant gasoline rations. Many food items, particularly the most popular ones, simply disappeared from grocery shelves for years. The government issued books of wartime gasoline ration stamps to Americans on the home front to submit when they purchased numerous important but scarce wartime products. No more stamps meant no more gas, meat, coffee, sugar, or whatever until the next weekly or monthly supply arrived, and it did not take long to run through a supply of ration stamps. Not even ration books could help Oklahomans get many things, though. Factories produced no new tires, major appliances, cars, or houses for the public after 1942 for years. Though some unemployed or underemployed Oklahoma citizens gained government employment, Tens of thousands had to leave much higher paying jobs to enter the service while suffering extended separation from loved ones. A high percentage of them endured war-related physical and or psychological damage, and thousands died. As during the New Deal, Roosevelt employed a semi-command economy, wherein the government exerted a much stronger influence in national economic affairs than normal. Also, like before, this strategy caused certain industries to prosper, albeit in an aberrant way. It caused many others to suffer, and it retarded long-term progress for the overall economy. By far the greatest hardships that wartime Oklahomans faced on the home front, though, concerned their worries over loved ones in harm's way and separated from them by oceans, continents, and war. Cushing native Ruth Sullivan's Navy midshipman husband served overseas on a combat ship that the Japanese sunk in shark-infested waters. Agonizing time passed before she learned that he had survived. Sullivan's summary of the emotional trauma experienced by Oklahoma civilians on the home front contrasts dramatically with the nostalgia of those who were not even alive during the war. Those were awful days, she told me. Helen Dwyer, my own mother, graduated from Oklahoma City's Central High School during the war. She recalled half a century later the letters she exchanged with several male classmates who were not married nor romantically attached and were deployed in the Pacific against the Japanese. They were lonely, and I knew they were scared. It was my way of helping them, she said. The devastation she felt when numerous of these young men she had known since they were little boys ceased writing and she learned they had been killed never left her. Oklahomans on the home front contributed to the war effort in many ways. Thousands of Oklahoma housewives grew much of their family's food during the spring and summer in victory gardens. Oklahomans contributed to war bond drives, Red Cross efforts, and scrap material collections. One such collection in Blanchard collected nearly 70 tons of scrap iron and other materials piled high for an entire half block in just 5 hours. They also helped shoulder 3 crucial efforts that tipped the scales of victory toward the Allies over their determined Axis foes. These were, first, manufacturing plants that produced war-related machines and equipment. Secondly, the petroleum industry, whose oil wells, refineries, and pipelines fueled Allied armies, navies, and air forces, and ultimately spelled doom for the German and Japanese militaries, whose engines ran dry. And finally, the farm and ranch crops and stock that fed our boys, as they were called, even as the Axis armies and civilians gradually ran out of food. And after the break, Gwen, we'll dig more into the specific examples of how Oklahomans changed the course of the war, in particular many female Oklahomans, both on the home front and the battlefront.
We're back in the living rooms of Oklahoma during World War II. This is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history through the stories we're told. John J. Dwyer, continue with Part 2.
Oklahoma and World War II, Gwen. Well, longtime President K.S. Boots Adams and Bartlesville-based Phillips Petroleum Company made some of the most historic contributions to the war effort of any company in America. By the time the United States entered the conflict, Phillips already stood as the nation's largest independent producer. Adams had also driven Phillips to the front rank of research and development in its industry. The rampaging Japanese, meanwhile, had cut off America's Southeast Asia supply of rubber, crucial to military victory. No quality synthetic rubber product had yet been developed. Adams-led Phillips spearheaded an audacious national program to fill that void. Its resounding success enabled the mass production of material ranging from aircraft and vehicle tires to rubber rafts and rain slickers for jungle monsoons. Another key to winning the war was the Phillips-led perfecting of the HF alkylation process. This enabled the production of high-octane aviation fuel. This boosted the power of American aircraft, such as the incomparable P-51 Mustang fighter plane. It helped provide them with the winning edge over the determined German Luftwaffe. So pivotal were Phillips' contributions that Boots Adams and future President Dwight Eisenhower, the Allied Commander-in-Chief in the European theater for whom these Phillips-driven inventions were of mortal import, became close friends. Well, another Oklahoma pillar in winning World War II was Enid's George Failing and his oil and gas drilling company. A creative and engineering genius, Failing was not afraid to get knee-deep and dirty in the oil patch with his men. This cost him part of his hearing and sight, but also spawned his visionary mounting of portable drilling platforms on Ford pickup trucks, whose engines powered them. Now, operators could blitz the oil patch with rigs and pepper them with downhole drilling within hours rather than days or weeks. By the time America went to war, Failing had also designed a compact drill that fit on C-47 transport planes and traveled with Allied soldiers to mine water for them on battlefields all over the world. Well, Oklahoma's warm climate, as well as friendly relations between President Roosevelt and its Democratic and congressional delegation and Governor business titan Robert S. Kerr, helped spur a flurry of military base and manufacturing construction across the state. This included 27 new Army and Army Air Corps bases and 13 naval bases in the landlocked state, including the Norman bases that sprawled across hundreds of acres, included dozens of buildings, and trained thousands of naval aviators, mechanics, and ground crew. Also, Douglas, Spartan, and other plants employed tens of thousands of people and produced everything from giant C-47 Gooneyberg cargo planes to gunpowder and ammunition. Air bases across Oklahoma trained fighter and bomber pilots for the U.S., Britain during the Battle of Britain, and other Allied nations. The Center State also hosted over 20,000 German prisoners of war in 32 camps across the state. The vast majority interacted well with their captors and even the surrounding communities, where many of them traveled to work and shop. The Germans even received, upon request, guest lectures from OU professors on such topics as history and democratic government. And Gwen, I want to conclude this second of 3 episodes of Oklahoma in World War II with a large and courageous host of Oklahomans who not only served on the home front, but in many cases traveled to the battlefront.
This is one of my favorite parts.
Scores of Oklahoma women left the home front to serve in organizations like the Army Air Corps, Women's Army Corps, the Navy's Waves, or the Red Cross. Oklahoma A&M, now OSU, established a WAVE training center. All of these military service volunteers followed U.S. military forces into every battle zone of the war. They performed a vast array of duties, including as medical and surgical technicians, telephone and radio operators, cryptographers, cryptanalysts, and many others. In an era before they were allowed into combat themselves, women trained men in field artillery and code sending and receiving, rigged parachutes, and served in numerous capacities within the medical department. Thousands of other Oklahoma women worked as aircraft mechanics and many other Rosie the Riveter roles to build and repair U.S. fighters and bombers. Angels of the Airfields is what American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines called nurses evacuation units. These women risked their lives to escort wounded warriors from the worst World War II battlefields to forward operating hospitals. According to one military historian, flight nurses served as the military equivalent of Dante's Beatrice, who in the allegorical poem The Divine Comedy is a symbol of hope who guides the author protagonist through purgatory and hell to heaven. Oklahoma's Angels of the World War II Airfields.
Now that's Oklahoma Gold. Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute of History, johnjdwyer.com, me, Gwen Falconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwood's Stores, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with our Will Rogers Medallion-winning author-historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. It's Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history with the stories we ponder. John J. Dwyer, World War II?
Yes, Gwen, in the first two episodes of this three-part series, Oklahoma and World War II, we chronicled the 1930s rise of violent dictatorships in Germany and Japan, the worldwide conflict they provoked, America's entry on the Allied side against them after being attacked by the Japanese in December 1941, and the immense contributions of Oklahomans. We talked mostly so far on the home front. Today, we conclude this three-part series on this remarkable period of history with a focus on some of the Oklahomans who left their lasting mark on the field of battle. Several of these mighty warriors are featured in their own episodes of Oklahoma Gold. In our concluding part 3, we'll rehearse an awe-inspiring gallery of World War II Oklahoma heroes. You will be stunned at how huge a role they played in saving the world from the tyrannical forces terrorizing it during those years. And as we discussed last time, the pendulum of war in the European theater of World War II gradually swung toward America and the other allies through 1943. But it took until May 1945 to defeat the Germans and their junior partners, the Italians. In the Pacific theater, meanwhile, America had gradually gained the upper hand against Japan, and a series of fearsome firebombings of Japanese cities preceded the August 1945 atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that ended the war. In this program, friends, we're going to acquaint you with just a few of the legendary Oklahoma Patriots who helped spearhead the free world's defeat of these godless empires. Prominent in this pantheon of Oklahoma and American heroes is Lucian A. Truscott, Jr., father of the Rangers. This rural Cleveland County boy grew up to become one of the greatest generals of World War II. He commanded the U.S. 3rd Division in the Allies' amphibious assaults on southern Italy at Sicily, Salerno, and Anzio. Also, the 6th Corps invasion of southern France and the 5th Army in the mountains of Italy and final destruction of German forces in that country. He led the 3rd Army, replacing the deceased George Patton. And Gwen, every Oklahoman needs to know that Lucian Truscott conceived, founded, organized, and named the elite United States Army Rangers. Next is Raymond S. McClain, known as the Citizen General, one of the greatest American soldiers of the war and the highest-ranking civilian officer in history. This successful young Oklahoma City businessman and World War I Machine Gun Corps combat officer helped build the OKC-based 45th Infantry Division, better known as the Thunderbirds, from its formation in 1923. Through his efforts, the 45th became the best-trained National Guard division in the nation, historian David L. Frazier declared. McClain commanded World War II artillery divisions at Sicily, Anzio, and Normandy. The largest parade crowd in Oklahoma history, 100,000 people, jammed 20 city blocks, nearly 2 straight miles, to cheer for hometown boy and Major General Raymond S. McClain and the military parade given in his honor at the end of World War II. But ironically, it was Tulsa that named its McClain High School for the famed Citizen General. Next is Jake McNeese and the Filthy 13. The Lord had 2 places for putting people, heaven or hell, said Maysville native and longtime Ponca City resident James E. Jake McNeese. He was afraid to put me in either of them. Well, the Nazis, whom the part Choctaw, mostly Irish, Oklahoman terrorized in World War II, would likely agree. Leader of an elite paratrooper demolition unit, the 101st Airborne Brawler destroyed German bridges at Normandy, helped save his fellow 101st battered expletive deleted of Bastogne, wreaked havoc behind enemy lines for a year, and inspired the epic novel and film The Dirty Dozen. In 1929, 8-year-old Robert Johnson watched World War I stunt pilots dazzle the crowd at Lawton's Wiley Post Field. Then and there, I changed my goal to Army aviator, Johnson remembered. As rugged as the P-47 Thunderbolt fighter plane he piloted in World War II, former Lawton High football star Bob Johnson would shoot down 27 Axis planes and become the second leading American ace in the European theater. Southeastern state of Durant graduate and World War I veteran Ira Eaker endures as the father of the United States Air Force, which he helped found and build. A daring test pilot, he flew the first cross-country flight on instruments. He built the mighty 8th Army Air Force that brought the fearsome German Luftwaffe to its knees and played a central role in winning World War II. He personally led the perilous first all-United States bombing mission of the war against Nazi Germany. Some of the most famous naval and air exploits of the 20th century unfolded on and around ships commanded by Oklahoman Mark Pete Mitcher. At the end of World War II, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the highest-ranking U.S. naval officer in the Pacific Theater, provided this valedictory of the sage Oklahoman and America's fast Navy. He is the most experienced and most able officer in the handling of fast carrier task forces who has yet been developed, Nimitz said. It is doubtful if any officer has made more important contributions than Mark Mitcher toward extinction of the enemy fleet. And that's the end of Admiral Chester Nimitz's quote. One of the most ingenious resources the United States and its allies utilized to defeat the mighty German military of World War II was the Comanche Code Talkers. In a similar manner to the Oklahoma Choctaws of World War I, these Lawton area natives created a 250-word military code in their native language. Various of their tribal words represented terms germane to European theater warfare. Their battlefield military code conveyed key commands among American Army units while fighting on many famous fields of battle, including Normandy Beach and the Battle of the Bulge, and was never broken by the enemy, who had previously intercepted countless such communications. How uncommon was the valor of Tecumseh native Reuben Rivers? He was the most famous warrior of the 761st Tank Battalion, or Black Panthers, the first such African-American unit ever to roll forth on foreign fields. Jackie Robinson was one of his compadres. Rivers was one of 7 blacks to earn the Medal of Honor in World War II. He received his award posthumously more than half a century after he went down shooting it out with the Germans as he covered his unit's shell-blasted retreat.
These are names I know, but now I know why. This is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history with the names we know and now know why. John J. Dwyer, what's the golden nugget of World War II, Part 3?
Right you are, Gwen, not just for this episode, but this is the concluding part of our 3-episode series of a very large and pivotal era of Oklahoman American and world history, Oklahoma and World War II. Well, in retrospect, the immense cost paid by America's greatest generation to win World War II is hauntingly engraved on a war memorial to the nearly 100 patriots who died from just one small Oklahoma town in World War II, Ponca City. Of course, one of those was Waddy Young, who has his own Oklahoma Gold program. 20 Oklahomans won the Medal of Honor in World War II. In addition to the aforementioned tank commander Reuben Rivers of Tecumseh, they included Broken Arrow native Ernest Childers, a Creek Indian, who received the first Medal of Honor awarded to a Native American since the Indian Wars of the 19th century. Also, Leon Vance of Enid, for whom Vance Air Force Base in that town, now one of the largest American pilot training bases in the world, is named. Leon Vance, a martyred World War II Oklahoma hero. And 45th Infantry Thunderbird and Medal of Honor winner Jack Treadwell of Snyder, who died as the most highly decorated man in the United States Armed Forces. In addition to his awe-inspiring World War II combat feats, he commanded an infantry brigade in the Vietnam War, served in 3 battle campaigns there, and made over 100 parachute jumps in combat, all while 50 years of age. Oklahoma's fighting men left an indelible legacy of bravery and sacrifice. More than 6,000 died in World War II, and 11,000 others sustained serious wounds. Most Oklahoma servicemen shipped overseas for little pay, separated from family and friends for months or even years. Multitudes of them endured malaria-ridden islands and jungles, or freezing forests and mountains, windswept, burning desert sands, and experienced the terrors of combat and fear of maiming, capture, or death. They participated in legendary deeds of valor, such as scaling the Normandy cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, crashing their torpedo planes into the Japanese carriers at Midway, holding the line at Bastogne, running the murderous aerial gauntlet at the Ploiești, Romania oil refinery, and winning history's greatest naval battle at Leyte Gulf. The Center State produced nearly the highest number of Medal of Honor winners, proportionate to its population, of any state in the Union. More than 500,000 Oklahoma men volunteered or answered wartime enlistment calls. This represented nearly 25% of the state's entire population, including women, children, and senior citizens. Thousands volunteered prior to the war for the 45th Division of the National Guard, based in Oklahoma City's Lincoln Park Armory, whose story shall close this series. Men from Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona initially comprised the 45th, and eventually men from every state. But always Oklahomans filled the dominant role. In September 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt federalized the division. Thus began its pilgrimage into legend as the famed Thunderbirds, named for the powerful bird of American Indian lore whose various movements supposedly generated wind, thunder, lightning, and storms. After nearly 2 years of rough and varied training at Fort Sill and other locales around the U.S., that featured every conceivable terrain, climate, and situation, the Thunderbirds shipped out to North Africa in June 1943. Within a few weeks, they stormed the beaches of Sicily, the southern boot of Italy, in the largest amphibious operation of the war in terms of landing zone size and divisions landed the first day. For over a month, the Thunderbirds and other Allied divisions slugged it out with Germans and Italians in a fight that cost nearly 25,000 Allied casualties. They won the battle, though, and muscled Axis forces off the island, opened the Mediterranean Sea for Allied naval forces, cleared the way for the Allied invasion of Italy, and ended fascist dictator Benito Mussolini's 2-decade iron rule over that nation. The rest of the long odyssey of the 45th Division, wrote historian Gaston Litton, is a timetable in valor and honor, as the division paused beside the now famous places where heroism was tested before the drive and determination of the men carried the march forward to final victory, end quote. The Thunderbirds saw 511 days of combat in World War II and suffered the third most casualties of any American division in the European theater. They fought at Salerno, Anzio, St. Maxime, and Alsace, crossed the Rhine, captured Hitler's shrine city of Nuremberg, helped take Munich, and liberated the Nazis' infamous Dachau death camp. 9 Thunderbirds received the Medal of Honor. Their final wartime commander, General H.J.D. Meyer, pronounced perhaps the best epitaph for the 45th, and I quote now General Meyer, "Whatever destiny may hold in store for our great country, and however long that country's military history may continue, readers in the future will search long before finding a chapter more brilliant than that written by the quill that was dipped in the blood of the Thunderbirds."
Deeds of valor and Oklahomans. Now that's Oklahoma gold.